Hello everyone and welcome to Martin's Home & Garden's Houseplant of the Week. This week we're talking about one of the largest out of the two largest flowering plant families, which is Orchidaceae. So we didn't really want to specify a certain type of orchid because they're all so beautiful and they all have a very similar care routine. And if we tried to break it down into all different types of orchids, we could be here and do this Houseplant of the Week forever. Which I wouldn't be opposed to, but I thought we would just stick to general care of orchids today. Orchids are a pretty historical plant. They have tons of different symbolic meanings, and they just are so beautiful and come in a variety of different shapes and colors and different sizes as well. Orchids are known to be a symbol of love, wealth, prosperity, basically just like all of the good things that you would want to be, orchids symbolize that. And actually ancient Greeks believed that you could determine the gender of your unborn child by eating the tubers of orchids, which I'm not exactly sure how they determined that, but that's what they said. So that's a pretty cool fun fact about orchids. Along with that, orchids are, one of the largest plant families, and they do come in so many different shapes and sizes. Here with me, I have several different types. Now, this one here is a very common one, like you could find at Kroger or Walmart. Phalaenopsis is what this one's called, also known as moth orchids. They just are, they're really popular, really beautiful because of their flower, and they are able to produce blooms more than once a year from the same stalk, a lot of people say, which is pretty interesting. So we'll get into care and stuff because orchid care can seem like a dauntless task, like something that, you have to be a master of to grow orchids and have them to bloom more than one time. But really, as long as you know how to care for orchids and you're cautious about how you're doing it, orchids really aren't that difficult. When it comes to watering your orchid, you're going to want to make sure that you're not going to rot the plant's roots. This means that you pot it in something that provides really good aeration and good drainage. Orchids are epiphytic plants, so they do have those roots that need air. They grow on barks of trees and jungles, and so they're going to want to have lots of roots that are just kind of exposed. Here's one that you can see that has lots of roots that are exposed. This is an indication that it does need to be repotted. But a lot of times their roots are going to want to be kind of everywhere. We just watered these, which is why we're a little leaky. And this is a good example of a pot that you would pot an orchid into because it's got these holes which really provide good airflow and good drainage. So orchids don't need to be watered more than once a week, pretty much ever. The only time you'll ever water them about once a week is in the growing season, so like spring and summer. They'll start to bloom around then as well, which is why you want to make sure that you're giving them adequate water, because if you don't, they'll drop the blooms or the blooms will be droopy. And one of the most fun parts about orchids is their blooms, so you don't want to do that. Another thing about orchids that is fun to look out for, if your foliage starts to turn a lime green type of color, kind of like the color of certain grasses or, hostas or something like that, it means it's not getting enough light. So making sure for orchids, like their optimal window, like facing direction, is an eastern facing window. Northern windows can be too dark, and then western windows can be too hot in the afternoon. So eastern is like pretty much perfect for them. You do want to feed them with a good all-purpose orchid food, or just, general fertilizer. This is a bloom booster. This is something that I use on tons of plants that I just want to bloom, but it's really good for orchids. You just pour a little bit of this into your water, soak them in it for about 15 to 30 minutes, and hopefully you will see beautiful blooms on your orchid in no time. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is when orchids are done blooming, so like the Phalaenopsis orchid right here, you can cut off where the bloom started on the stem, and people say that it grows out of that same stalk again. But with other types of orchids, you'll want to cut back down to the base of the leaves where the stalk comes out. And that way it'll send up another shoot at some point as well. But orchids are really just a great plant family. They don't have too many pests and disease that you really have to look out for. I mean, same as most of your houseplants. But whether you're keeping these in the house or you want to start a hobby where you're doing orchids in a greenhouse or really whatever you're doing, orchids are a great way to spend your time and really, master a certain type of plant. We have tons of orchids here that are blooming. They're a great gift for Mother's Day, and they are pretty beautiful. We have lots of rare types. So come on in, check out our orchids, ask us some questions. We can repot for you because we have the pots, we have orchid bark, and we have fertilizer. So come on in, check out our orchids, and we'll see you soon.